Omar Zenhom is a teacher at heart, and I never really understood that until we had this interview. Omar has a daily business podcast. It's one of the top business podcasts. It's called The $100 MBA. It's great. I've listened to it a number of times, and I was always just so amazed at just the lift of having a daily podcast and doing it for years and years. He's been podcasting longer than I have. I've been podcasting for 7 or 8 years, and I just can't imagine podcasting every single day. But once we dug into some of Omar's story and his background as a teacher and the work of prepping lessons every day for teaching and how that trained him, how that got him into the space where he could, without as much of a heavy lift, make podcasts every day, just put it all into context for me. I had a great conversation with Omar. We talked about his childhood growing up as a child of immigrants to the many entrepreneur pursuits that he's had along the way. It's just a really fun conversation. I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I did. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Meaning Movement podcast. We know you want to build a stress-free life and business that gives you the financial freedom and lifestyle that you want. In order to do that, you have to eliminate the conflict between your work and the rest of your life. But the problem is, running a business is hard and requires sacrifice and commitment, leaving you feeling depleted, exhausted, and even burned out. But we believe that every entrepreneur deserves to recapture the motivation and energy they need to run their business. And that is what this show is all about. I'm your host, Dan Cumberland. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button wherever you are listening, and let's go. Omar, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the Meaning Movement podcast.
It's great to be here, Dan. Thanks for having me.
I like to always start with the same question, which is, how do you begin to talk about the work that you do?
The best way I could describe the work I do is all my adult life I've been teaching, and it's just been in different forms. Right now, I teach people on a podcast. I teach people through webinars. Sales is a form of education and teaching, so I do a bit of that as well. I that's how I describe myself. A lot of people, I would probably describe myself as a teacher first, then an entrepreneur second.
I love that. I love the the prioritization or hierarchy. Maybe that's a better word. Teacher than podcaster, or not podcaster, but you said entrepreneur. I just want to kind of rewind here, but I think the way to get into it, I want to just ask about your relationship with the word teacher, and when did that energy first kind of emerge in your life?
Yeah, it was probably just university. I was a little bit confused about what I wanted to do for a living. I knew I had to do something significant or do something that's important. My parents are immigrants to America. They're Egyptian. They migrated to America in the late 60s, and I was born in the U.S. And growing up in an immigrant household, you don't squander opportunities. You don't just take your time to figure things out. I'm not pointing any fingers here. It's just that was my reality. Like, they sacrificed so much to change their life, change their world, new country, new language, new everything. My mom had to redo her degree because they didn't recognize her degree from Egypt. Wow. So the expectations were like, get it together and don't waste our time with what you want to do. So I knew I didn't want to be a doctor or an engineer, which is like the typical kind of like son of an immigrant path down the road. Just because it just didn't appeal to me. I didn't want to go into military, but I thought teaching was interesting because I grew up in a household where my dad was in sales. My dad was a car salesman, actually. He ran a car dealership, and one of the things that you learn if you're a child of a parent that's in sales is it's very up and down. One summer you're having a summer holiday at Disney World, the next summer it's in the backyard. So you really learn really quickly that.
Yes.
That's not really something I really gravitated to. It's funny because some of the stuff that I was around seeped in later on, but I wanted a stable job basically. So I went into education and I became a teacher. I got my bachelor's and then my master's in education. I taught English as a second language. That was my forte, and that was my career for 13 years. I was a
Wow.
high school and university teacher. I was really good at it. At the age of 25, I was the head of department at the school I was teaching at, where I was managing 30 teachers twice my age. And I don't say I'm good at it to beat on my chest. I say it because it was hard to leave that job. It's really hard to leave something you're good at because you finally
Yes.
discover something that you have some momentum and you're good and you're getting praised, and it I don't want to say it comes easy, but it kind of it feels natural. So,
Yes.
but at some point towards the end of that run, um, I really didn't like the lack of autonomy in education in institutions like schools, where basically as a teacher, you show up to the building, they give you a schedule, they give you a curriculum, they tell you where to be, they tell you which classroom to be in, what to teach, how to teach it. It's very prescriptive, and doesn't really leave a lot of room for creativity. And there's a lot of pressure because you got these 30 students in your class where you have to make sure they pass by the end of the semester, and you have a deadline and all that. So at some point along the way, I just decided I want to do something else. I want to maybe see what I could do if I dedicate this energy to my own thing. While I was in teaching, I built some side businesses on the side and discovered the internet and all that kind of stuff. This is 2002, so it's pretty early days.
Yeah.
It's like
Ancient history.
yeah, this is before WordPress. This is before
Yeah.
PayPal. It's pretty. It was pretty. We were rubbing two sticks together. That's how we were getting things done.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I just learned while I had a job. I tell a lot of people, I side hustled for over a decade before I became a full time entrepreneur. But at some
Mm,
point, I would say my frustration with my current career outgrew my fear of leaving my job and took the
mm.
plunge and became a full-time entrepreneur in 2012.
Wow. Wow. I love it. Thank you for that. Yeah, just overview of the whole process. I'm curious by the time you I don't know, and you can tell me if this is too personal of a question, but it's something I'm just really curious about for someone like with your background, your parents experience and all the sacrifice, just about like that, the weight of like carrying that expectation. I guess my question is like, where have you learned to how have you learned to carry that expectation, or
Yeah,
and how has that shifted, I think is the question, from when you were thinking about what to do with your life, and
yeah,
thinking about like a noble career, to where you are now. Yeah, I think there's a question in there.
yeah. I mean, to kind of talk a little bit about that. When you're a kid, you don't really know something is off until you're out of the situation. Like when I grew up, I thought that was normal. I
Yeah.
thought that you know
Yeah.
that's how all parents acted, and I never kind of like traded notes with my friends in school. Um, and
Yeah.
I didn't realize how one of the things I've learned in that experience, because I don't want to make it sound like there's so much pressure and my parents were like Nazis. No, of course not.
Yeah.
They just
Yeah.
really wanted the best for us because they really sacrificed a lot to be here. And I would say it's kind of, you felt the sense of um, you don't let opportunities squander. If something is
Yes.
is is in front of you, even if it's something like a driver's course, to be a better driver, and it's included in your insurance, go ahead and take it, like whatever, like this is
Yeah.
an opportunity, so
Mm.
this is kind of the school of thought that I grew up in. So the other thing is that everything my parents did, everything us growing up, nothing came easy. It's super hard.
Mm.
Like everything was done through hard work. Like people don't
Yeah.
realize how hard it is for immigrants to come to a new country. Like it's a long process. Once they get here, it's like they don't know anybody. Imagine going somewhere. Imagine
Yeah.
getting dropped in like South Korea, and you don't know anybody. You don't know the language.
Yeah.
You don't know how to get a haircut. Like you don't know how to do
Yeah.
anything. They had to learn everything step by step. Everything is hard. Like the default is hard. So
Yes.
growing up in that environment and understanding, that life is supposed to be hard. Like that's the
Mhm.
default.
Yeah.
That really builds a lot of resilience. I think that you're not,
Mhm.
and I'm not. a mental health expert, but I think it's helped my mental health a lot in terms of understanding that things that in life are going to be hard sometimes, and
Yeah.
if you want
Mm.
something, you're going to have to fight for it. You're going to have to work for it. It's just not going to fall in your lap. And at the same time, uh, it may not happen at all. Like that's an option.
Yeah.
Like that could happen. Like so
Yeah.
that's the stuff I kind of took from my childhood.
Yeah, I love that, and thank you for that. And I think so much of it resonates, with me, and I know many folks in the audience because whether or not, um, regardless of the specifics of family situations, I know we're always asking these questions when it comes to what are we going to do with our lives, what are we going to do next, of like what we want, and then also like in part like honoring and respecting like
Yeah.
everything that's come before us and what's brought us here, and it's like this tension that you have to hold, and so I just really appreciate you, yeah, sharing your perspective on that. Do you have kids?
No.
No, yeah, I'm curious. I was just curious as we think about how to parent. I have kids, so I'm always like asking folks. That's why I asked that. Like, how do you do that better? But like not bad. Like, and I think that's what I love about what you said is like that things are going to be hard. You build that expectation that things are going to be hard, and as a result, you build resilience, and that's
Yeah.
I think a really
Yeah.
important characteristic to build. So,
You
yeah,
touched on
that's
something,
that's
Dan,
that's
that
great.
was interesting. You just said that going after what you want and respecting the past and all that kind of one of the things I grew up with a perspective that's very different than a lot of other people because of my parents being immigrants is there's less stress about what you want and what you should do. Like I
Yeah.
never grew up
Mm.
feeling like, what do I want to do? Right.
Yeah.
Like I never had that
Yes.
kind of thought of like,
Oh, that's so
what's my
interesting.
passion? What I want to feel like, what's going to make me happy? Like that stuff is not in our DNA. Like what's in our
I
DNA is
love
like,
that.
hey, where could you add the most value? Where's your
Mm.
expertise? What did you do good in school? Like, what did you do well in school? How can you take those skills and turn that into a career so that you can help society, so you can help yourself, help your family? It's more of a communal, uh, sense of like you have a sense of responsibility to the world
Yes.
rather than
Yes.
hey, like, and I think that's a really good because I study a lot of
It's
entrepreneurs.
healthy.
Yeah, it's healthy, and I see a lot of entrepreneurs, and the entrepreneurs that I feel like that are the most stable and the ones that have the most success are the ones that recognize that hey, like it's not about like what you're most passionate about. It's about where can you add the most value. Where are your
Mm.
skills, your experience, your abilities best put to use? And I think
Yeah.
that a lot of times I talk to people that want to start businesses or build a business, they get kind of lost in this fog of like, well, I
Mhm.
tried this, but I didn't really love it. It's like most of the things you're going to do in life, you're not going to love 100%. Like even the things you
Yeah.
love, like I love
Yes.
snowboarding, right? But there's
Yeah.
times when I'm doing so, oh, my feet are killing me and I don't really love it. I should take a break. No, I can push myself a little bit, like, and build those feet muscles, like
Yes, yes.
that's just the reality of getting better. That's it.
Mhm. I love that. That is so, so good, and, like, in some ways, like, kind of the opposite of my experience. Like, I've spent a lot of time really feeling lost in, like, what am I gonna do? And I feel like I needed someone to say the things that you're saying of, like, it's not just about that. But I'm curious for you, and I wanna just take it to kind of that next layer of, like, how do you then, in that context, think about fulfillment and
Mhm.
purpose and like because like those are different words than passion but they're very strongly correlated, but I'm curious just for you like when do you feel like you're most fulfilled in your work and how does that relate to how you view your work in that bigger picture?
I feel like I'm most fulfilled when I make an impact in some way.
Yeah.
If it's that's like helping a new entrepreneur have a breakthrough, or maybe it's something I said in an interview like this, or just these
Yeah.
little things where I feel like you know one of my prized possessions. It's not really possessions because it's not mine, but it is the podcast that I run, the $100 MBA show, because I feel like if I get hit by a bus, I have a legacy. I have something that people can
Yes.
listen to for years upon years to be able to improve their ability to navigate a very confusing world of business, that keeps changing,
Mm.
that evolves and is
Mhm.
different for every single person. What works for me is not necessarily going to work for everybody, and all that kind of stuff. So for me,
Yeah.
I, I want to be clear. Like I do have a lot of fulfillment in that, but I do get burnt out. I do feel a
Yeah.
sense of like, I need a break. This is too much.
Mm.
There's days where like if I'll notice that I haven't really taken a good break, like a good 2 week break in a while, where it's hard to get up and keep doing what you have to do. And this is where you have to be self-aware and try to make
Yeah.
time to rest your body and your mind and step away from things. But the reason why I bring that up is just because fulfillment and burnout and being tired and not feeling like doing it does go hand in hand. Like some people,
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes feel like, well, maybe this is not something that lights me up if I feel burnt out. Like, well, that's just the work that's involved sometimes, you know?
Yes. Totally agree. Yeah, a parallel for me. I'm a runner, and I the further the deeper you get into, I mean, really, it's true with anything, but like into running, like the more you are in tune with like where your body needs recovery, and like
Mm,
it's like I kind of years ago when I started really taking running seriously, probably about five or 6 years ago,
hmm.
and like at that point it's just like every run was just a run, but like no, it's like my performance is like drastically different when I'm rested, or based on how many miles I put in the previous week, how many tempo, like fast runs, hard runs I
Yeah,
did versus just like slow long runs. And I think the same is true of work, and hopefully listeners who aren't runners can relate to that. Like no matter what it is, like you have to
yeah.
pace yourself and you have to give yourself that recovery time, and that's what I take from from what you said. Like even if you love running, right, you still got to get those rest days in.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that analogy running. I ran track in high school in spring because I used to play basketball. I used to just do to stay in shape, and it was something I loved, but I did it because my mom was not coming back from work until a certain time, so I had to do something after school. So
Yeah.
the thing I remember the most about track is during track practice. During I used to do long distances, do the mile, 2 mile, and while I'm doing it, I'm like I hate it. I'm like, this is horrible. What am I
Yes.
doing? I want to quit. What am I, right? And then on the bus ride home after practice, I'm looking out the window. Practice is over now. I'm going home now. I'm going to do my homework, have dinner. And I'm like, I can't quit. This is amazing. I feel great. Like,
Yes.
it's just,
Yes.
it's a mind game. It's crazy.
It totally is. It totally is. And just like when you're out there, like you're running like I've been doing a lot of like speed training, and speed work is hard. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, I've got to run as hard as I can for 2 minutes. 2 minutes is a long time when you're going all out. You think
Yeah.
like, oh, that's not that bad. But then like 10 seconds in, you're like, oh, wow, this is hard. And you're like
Yeah.
just counting down those seconds till you finish. But then you're like, that was awesome. And like you see yourself improving, and like all these things, this feedback loops happen. It's like, oh wow, I hate it when I'm in it sometimes, but also I love it, and like it's so meaningful. I think it's just such a good parallel to
Yeah.
to work, and to like our passions, not the right word, our chosen pursuits. Maybe that's
Yeah.
a better word for it. So I'm curious, just to kind of keep going on this, for folks who might be in a space where they're like, I don't know what I want to do. And
Hmm.
I know I think you gave a really interesting recipe of like, looking at where you can add the most value. But I'm just curious to have you go just a little bit deeper on that, of like,
Yeah,
what are
sure.
questions that they can ask to like just even to speak straight to people who are listening right now who might be in that kind of a space. Like what would you advise? Where should they be looking?
Yeah. So I was in that space for a very long time, and this is a time for experimentation. This is time for trying things, seeing things through, seeing how things feel. Sometimes in that experience, you're going to learn what kind of business you want to run. I started businesses. I had a clothing line business for a very long time. It was custom tailored clothing for men. It was a huge business, and we did really well. But I hated it because what I realized is my customers were more passionate about the product than I was. And I
Mm,
realized sometimes just a business opportunity, like seeing a need in the market, is not enough for you to have a successful business. To me, success is something that you enjoy doing and it fulfills your personal needs, but also fuels the lifestyle you want. So in that process of trying different things, you're going to learn things, and that starts with just accepting the fact, this is with a huge hurdle that a lot of people have to go through, is I will fail. Failure, I
mm,
have to fail. Failure is a rite of
yeah.
passage. I have to get through this. I'm going to stumble. I'm going to fall. Just like how a baby learns how to walk, we don't just like say, okay, pack it up, baby. You fell down 3 times. It's over. No more walking for
Yeah.
you. You know, right? We say, no, you're going to keep trying until you walk, right? That's how we do it.
Mm, mm,
But that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say
yeah.
is in terms of understanding your value and looking into how you can utilize that value. And I like the idea of synergizing things you're interested in, things that you love, and things that you can add value to. So a good example of this is like, let's say I want to become a travel blogger, right? I love travel. I love cultures and countries and cuisine and all that kind of stuff, right? And I want to start niching down, or maybe want to start with a country where I want to become a travel blogger, right? My favorite country is Japan, and I would love to start and do a great blog post or maybe a video series on Japan. But the reality is that as much as I love Japan and Japanese culture and food, and I'm so passionate about it, I don't speak Japanese. I've never lived in Japan. I only visited once. I probably can't tell you where not to get ripped off, or where's the best deals, or where are like the little outskirt hotels that are actually, half price versus going into the city. I don't know all these details because I'm basically a tourist when it comes to Japan, and I'm
Yeah.
just fascinated by it. I love it though, right? Instead, I should ask the question: well, if I can't add a lot of value there, where can I add a lot of value? And I look at my own personal experience. It's like, well, I probably could start with Egypt. I'm not, if I had to choose like a free trip anywhere in the world, probably Egypt would be like number 19 on the list, right? Because I've
Mm,
been there a dozen times. Every summer break, my parents would go back to Egypt and we'd go and see relatives and spend time there. Um, and it's not something I'm so passionate about. It's not something I love. It's probably, again, I wouldn't holiday there, but it's where I can add the most value. Why? I speak
yeah.
Arabic. I know exactly where to go and where not to get ripped off. I know exactly where you get a good
Yes.
deal. I know where you should exchange your money. I know, all the great spots for the best diving and all, because I've been there a million times and I understand, what it's all about, and which taxis by the airport are shady and which ones are the right ones. Like I can add a lot of value there, even though
Love it.
I don't love it that much, right?
Yes.
So the
Yes.
reason why I'm giving this analogy is just because um, it's a start. You're just getting
Yeah.
started. It's the first country I'm going to
Mm,
do in my travel blog business, right? But the point here is
yes.
that people don't realize how fun success is. That's fun, right? When you have
Yeah.
momentum and things start rolling, and people are like, "Wow, that was super
So
useful.
true.
I'm going to buy your ebook on the survival guide of Egypt," right? And then
Yeah.
with that momentum, with that business, with that revenue, you can then explore other places you can add value to, or maybe you can, in the
Mm,
meantime, get some experience somewhere that you love. But that's the
yes.
example I'd love to give.
I love it. It's a fantastic example. And I think even just to like, even just keep playing with that, right? Like to start with not like and I think this is so true of like all entrepreneurial and endeavors. You have this vision of this beautiful thing that you want to create in the world. And it's going to be, epic and awesome. But
Right.
like to actually create that would take years and, hundreds of thousands of dollars and like all of these things that like add up to it not being a good idea to create that thing until you have income, until you have users, until you have like
Yeah.
all these. So to be able to like reduce your vision into something more practical, like to
Yeah.
go back to this example, instead of going to Japan, like do it on Egypt, something and etc. Then it can give you that starting place um to get some momentum, to feel what it's like to actually do it, and make sure that's actually something that you enjoy
Mhm.
before you invest, your whole life into starting your Japan blog or whatever might be. So
Yeah. And
just
just to
great example.
kind of relate that to like a lot of, I speak to a lot of new entrepreneurs, and the most common representation, or the most common version of this is, I was, a senior developer at a company and now I want to be a life coach, right? And
Yeah.
I'm like, cool, you could be a life coach, but first of all, you've never coached before. Like you never actually ran a
Yeah.
coaching business. Okay, so
Yeah.
maybe as a step before that, why don't you become like an engineering coach, where you could show junior engineers how they can move up their
Yes.
career and improve? You have a lot of experience here. You're just throwing that away.
Yeah.
Like this is great value you can add. And then from there,
Yeah.
you can build. First of all, it also, you have credibility here. You have, people will sign up for your services because you have proven that you are a solid engineer and you moved up the corporate ladder. With life
Yeah.
coaching, you don't have any clients. No one knows. Like, you
Yes.
just change your life. So like,
Yes.
it's really hard for you to have
Yes.
momentum.
Yes. Well, and with that example too, what's crazy about it is like I actually feel like an engineer coach could make a lot more money a lot
Oh
more
yeah,
easily than a life coach, right? Like because that's
yeah,
like there's a hard outcome to like moving up your career your
totally.
career ladder, and if you can deliver that for people, yeah, which just that's a killer
And I say
example.
that,
Thank you.
like,
Yeah.
business is as hard as it is. Like, it's hard to
Yeah.
run a successful business as it is. Don't make it harder on yourself, right? Don't make it harder on yourself by like creating these circumstances that don't give you any advantages.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Thank you for that. Well, I want to just kind of double click on like your transition into entrepreneurship and like, I've heard, you had the clothing brand, you had,
Right.
a bunch of side hustles, like maybe just unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
Maybe especially like the leaving the job to go into the full-time entrepreneur, whatever recipe of work that looked like for you. Just really curious about it because
Sure.
that's where a lot of people are. They're often like, I could never take that leap. How did you take that leap?
So the first like business, I don't even call it a business, more like an experiment I had, was I had an eBay store where I did arbitrage, which basically means I would find a buyer for a product that they wanted, and I would find that product and sell it to them before I actually buy the product. So basically, I would my niche was rare Air Jordans, which are sneakers.
I
This is
love it.
before like
Yeah.
this became popular, this is back in 2002. So I would actually put up photos on my eBay store of a pair of Jordans that people would want in a few sizes, and I would put a price. And there are people that are willing to buy it because if I can secure that shoe for them. Once I had a
Yep.
buyer, I would then go and find somebody who had it and I would buy it for less price and make a difference. It's a very simple business model. It's like
Yeah.
tales old as time, right? But
Yeah.
it was the first time I ever made money outside my paycheck, and it was weird. It was like it was only my first thing was I only made like $30, but it was
Yeah.
weird to have $30 in my account that didn't come from payroll. And it just made me curious about the internet, and it was just something small. I didn't have a company, I didn't have an LLC, any of that stuff. I
Yeah.
was a sole proprietor. I was just trying to like, what is this internet thing? What is this business thing?
Hmm.
I read a book called Anyone Can Do It by Bobby and Sarah Hashmi, which is a book that's not very popular, but it's quite popular in the UK. It's a book by the founders of Coffee Republic, which was like the first barista style coffee before Starbucks came and took over in the UK. And it basically just catalogs their story. And I read that book on a flight just because it was cover to cover, because it was just so powerful to me for people just sharing their journey. And it was just people that had no business experience. And I thought, oh, maybe I could do this. And for me, from that point on, books became like my biggest teacher. I would buy as many books as I can. I ran through all the books that most people do in the beginning, like Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, How to Win Friends and
Yeah.
Influence People, Dale Carnegie, all these books that kind of build the foundation. I'm still a big believer that, a $10 book is incredible value for the education and perspective and mind shift you can get from. It just requires somebody
100%.
to have the patience to read it. And then I started experimenting in other businesses. I had, the clothing line I talked about. Some businesses I would build and then I had no customers. They would flop and I would just have to close down. And that's okay. I was still working my job. So I had that kind of safety net. When I transitioned out of teaching, that moment was I was actually I was the head of the department, and then I was trying to get the position of chair in the university I was working for. And in fact, the chair of the department left the university, and I was appointed acting chair. So I was doing the job for this person for a year and a half, but I never actually got like a salary increase or actual official change of title. But I was killing it and I was doing an incredible job, and my department was the best department in the whole university. And I was just like, why am I not getting this promotion?
Mm.
So I went to my supervisor, the dean of the university at the time, and I asked her, I said, hey, just wondering, I've been doing this for over a year and a half, which is long. It's 3 semesters,
Yeah.
um, why have I not gotten this job? And I kind of just saw her face kind of fell, and she couldn't like lie to my face. She basically just said to me, I know that the director wants to make an outside hire for this position. And basically they've been stringing me along until they find this
Mm.
hire. And in that moment, like I said, my frustration outgrew my fear. I just felt so powerless. I just felt like
Yeah.
I am doing everything for this university. I'm building all these great pieces of curriculum. I'm creating great initiatives, outreach, community, all this stuff. And I walk into the university. It's dark. I leave when it's dark. I'm putting everything I
Yeah.
can into it, and I can't take anything with me. I can't take anything
Mm.
with me when it's all gone. All the stuff I
Yes.
did, it's their property.
Mm.
So at that moment, I was just like, okay, anything is better than this feeling. I need to move on, and that's when I decided to resign. And in teaching, you have to give 6 months notice because you can't just leave in the middle of the semester. So I I gave 6 months notice, and at that moment, I didn't really know what I was going to do other than I wanted to uh, maybe help other people start businesses, just because a lot of my friends and family would call me, email me, and say, "Hey, how do you start a website? Like, what is? I know that you built some things in the past," and so I was kind of like the business person in my family. So I started like this is, and I recommend this to anybody who's getting started. Is just like I started a service based agency where I basically was a business consulting firm. If you had a business idea, you would come to me and I would help establish your assets. Like I would build your website, I would create your branding, and at the time it was just like creating your assets for social media. But it was like this is 2012, so it was just Twitter and Facebook, and that's it
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
Maybe Pinterest, I don't know. But and it was just kind of a package deal. Um, and I did that for about 6 months to a year, just so I can be able to survive. I moved to New York City because it was always a dream of mine to move to New York. At the time, I moved with Nicole, who's now my wife, and we basically wanted to be in an environment that encouraged us to work hard and to go after our dreams. And a lot of people don't realize how much your environment can affect you. Uh,
Mm.
no one lives in New York to have a cushy life or to just do the status quo. Everybody in New York
Yeah.
is chasing their dreams. Everybody is going,
Mm.
whether they want to be an actor, whether they want to be a musician, whether they're trying to break out and be like this whiz kid in Wall Street, whatever. Everybody is running after it. And when you're in that
Yes.
environment, it pushes you to really focus on what's important, which is, your improvement, your own progress. So I
Yeah.
had no car. Basically, my biggest expense was just rent, and that's it. And we just ate falafels for dinner every day or something.
Yes.
It was one of those those ramen days. So which was
Yeah.
hard because I'm coming off the back of a career which I was very successful in, making very good money. And now I'm
Mm.
going back to college days. I'm 32 by this time. Like most people are buying houses and starting their life and going on fancy vacations. And I'm, scraping things together so I can be able to pay my rent. So I
Mm.
did the business consultancy for a bit. And from there, I started the podcast, The $100 MBA Show, because I was getting a lot of questions about people saying, "Hey, I want to start an MBA. I want to start an education. I want to start a business, and I don't have the business education for it. Should I get my MBA?" And I myself went to business school after that transition for a semester and realized, oh, I don't need to be here. Like this
Yeah.
is for people that want to get a job at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley at the time. This is
Mm.
not for somebody like these institutions don't have a monopoly on the information. I can learn this from books and
Mhm.
experience, and go to a few conferences and network. And for far less money, I can do this on my own. And that's kind of where the $100 MBA started. And I
Yeah.
created a little course called the $100 MBA, and from there we had a daily podcast called the $100 MBA Show, which is daily business lessons, which is our podcast. And that's kind of where we started to get a lot of traction. And I always say to people, like, if this isn't like I'm giving you the fast forward version, but I had a
Yeah.
podcast before that was a total flop and failed. And the big differentiator was I wasn't leveraging my strengths. The other podcast was
Mm.
an interview podcast. I'm horrible at interviewing.
Mm.
And the $100 MBA Show podcast is a teaching podcast where I teach a lesson every day. Um,
Yeah.
and that's me using my experience, my expertise. I have a teaching degree. I have multiple certificates in like teaching and assessment. I taught 5 classes every single day, 5 days a week. It was my livelihood. Why am I not
Yes.
teaching? So like to me was this became obvious as this is what I had to do.
Mm. And who helped point that out, or was it just like a realization, or did someone say like in my see the story I'm telling myself is like one day
Yeah.
your wife was like I don't know your relationship
Yeah.
with your wife, but like someone was like, Omar, why aren't you just doing that thing that you know how to do so well? Like
Yeah.
was there a conversation or like a kind of a light bulb moment?
It was Mr. Failure. Failure is it will
Yeah.
wake you up. We had a
Ugh.
podcast that didn't do well. We worked really
Yeah.
hard on it. Had 46 episodes, um, and we had some decent guests, and it was really good. And we had Nicole went to New York Film Academy, and she was doing a lot of. She was a videographer, and she would do a lot of gigs. And we had a gig in New York, and we were living in San Diego at the time. And we did a road trip. We basically said, let's take some time to just think about what's going right, what's going wrong, why is this flopping.
Yeah.
It's really frustrating because you're working so hard on this thing. And
Ugh.
in that trip, it was just us in the open road. When you're driving or on the road, you really can't look at your phone too much, so you're just kind of in your thoughts and you're just talking aloud. And we just realized, we looked at all the top business podcasts at the moment. I looked at people like Tim Ferriss, who has like what 5 New York Times bestsellers. All he does is win. This guy, right? So like,
Yes.
how am I going to compete with
So
Tim Ferriss?
frustrating.
Yeah, no, but like, let's be like, I was trying to getting honest with
Yeah.
myself. Like, how am I going to compete with Tim Ferriss with this huge
Yes.
audience? How am I going to
You
compete
can't.
with Jordan Harbinger, who
Hmm.
started podcasting before the iPhone? Right? How am
Yeah.
I going to compete with Pat Flynn, who's beloved by so many people and has built this incredible brand, or John Lee Dumas, or all these people that
Yep.
were on the top of the top list of business podcasts? And it just dawned on me, like, what can I do that's better than them? Like, these guys are
Mm.
doing things that are better than me. What can I do that's better than them? And I thought, I'm pretty sure I can teach the pants off all of them, because they just didn't have the experience I do. They don't have the education
Yeah.
I had. They and it just has to do with my experience. Um, and I thought I got to find a way to leverage my teaching. And
Yes.
then Nicole mentioned, one of our favorite podcasts are Coffee Break French and Coffee Break Spanish, which are language
Mm.
lesson podcasts, where just every
Mm.
day you learn a little bit of that
Yeah.
language. And I thought, well, no one's really doing that with business. No one's really giving people
Mm.
little nuggets, a little lesson, something to implement right away so they can uh, see improvement and come back the next day and build upon it. And that's kind of how the $100 MBA show got born. And it's interesting because it just came out of frustration and just getting honest with
Yeah.
ourselves. And sometimes you just got to stop and say, okay, this is not working. What can I do to
Yep.
fix this problem? And in fact, when we launched in 2014, that December, we won Best of iTunes, which was an incredible shock, but a great
Wow.
honor for us to be one of the dozen podcasts mentioned by Apple as the best podcast of the year. And and I reached out and asked them why did we get chosen? This is great and all, but why? And the
Yeah.
reason they gave us is just you added something to the business genre that we haven't seen before. And I thought, oh,
Oh,
okay,
that's
cool.
awesome.
So that really helped kind of propel us and grow the show a little bit more, and
Mm.
and just also just make us feel like we're on the right path.
I love it. What a great, yeah. Thank you for all of that. And I feel like I've very much been in those spaces. Like you say, failure is a failure is a good teacher. Um, but sometimes it just takes a lot to actually sit down and listen to that. I feel like my story is, without this becoming like Dan's self-help hour, like I've had a lot of like base hits, but
Yeah,
never a home run. And I feel like that's like the story of my entrepreneurship, where it's like, yeah, I want that to be like, I want it to go one way or the other. Like, it'd be so much easier if it was like, oh, that didn't work and totally flopped, or that was a smash hit home run and here's my thing. And so yeah, just as I'm thinking about it, I've been in those conversations, with my wife, and on those drives, but I haven't quite landed on the place where we really landed traction, maybe in the same way that you did, which is just, it's fun to hear your story. So thank you for that.
yeah.
tell me a little bit, just fast forwarding from that moment a little bit further ahead. So I know you have the podcast and the course that's related, and I'm sure there's a handful of assets underneath the $100 MBA brand, and then you also have a software. Where
Yeah.
did that emerge from? Like, tell me a little bit how are they connected? How are they not connected?
Yeah.
Like, what's that story?
Again, it just comes back to teaching. When I was launching the $100 MBA, I was trying to sell memberships to it, and I was running webinars to do that because for me, it was like this is like a miracle, a modern miracle, being able to teach to millions of people, or not millions, but hundreds of people at the
Yeah,
same time from the comfort of their computer. This is 2012, 2013, so it was very like early days, and I was just like, I love the idea of it, but unfortunately, it took like 2 to 3 hours to put everything together. Um,
yeah,
to put the webinar together because it was not just the video streaming part, but it was also like the marketing part, the registration part, the follow up later on with email sequences, the recording of the actual session, giving the recording to people that missed it or attended, making sure that the chat is engaging and make sure that there's a way to ask questions and filtering that all out. So putting all like the technical aspect, putting it all together would take me like 2 to 3 hours every single week. And I was just like, there's got to be a
yeah,
better way than this. Um,
yeah.
so again, a failure was a big teacher. I actually launched a product called the DIY Webinar Guide, which was a book and course that taught people how to put together what I did. I thought, oh, I could just show people my
Your
procedure and
process. Yeah.
help them out, and hopefully, other people are going to be interested. And I spent 4 months, me and Nicole, working on this thing and the sales pages and the videos and all that kind of stuff, and putting it all together, make it a little polished, and we launched it. And we're so excited about it, and we got 2 sales, and one of them was a chargeback. So one of them was actually just like fraud, right?
Oh.
And the other one was just a sympathy sale by a friend of ours, John Lee Dumas, who just wanted to check out what we're doing. Um,
Oh,
and it was a huge wake up call because it's like I just spent 4 months on this and it just flopped
yes.
royally. And I realized that
Yes.
okay, people don't want to do the work; they want it done for them,
Mm,
right?
yep.
And that's when I started scrapping together some software and try to build something for myself. I started running some webinars with something I put together. I'm a very amateur PHP, HTML kind of developer. I put together like the beta version just so I can use it. It wasn't ready for commercial use, but it was just enough for me
Yeah.
to see it happen. And the people on the webinar are asking me like, "What is this thing you're using for this webinar?" I was like, "Oh, it's just something I put together." And they
Yes.
said, "Can we buy it?" And at that moment, I was like, "Okay, maybe we have something here." So, and the reason I think why people were attracted in the first place is because we've never been like the webinar software for marketers or salesy kind of schwarmy kind of tactics.
Yeah.
We were more focused on making a better learning and teaching environment and making sure that
Mm,
your content shines and that you can just focus on the content and not worry about the tech. This
yeah.
means that you're not going to have every bell and whistle, but it also means that it's easy to use and you can jump in and jump out, and you're not overwhelmed by all the different things you have to do. So our audience really liked that because they're just like, I just want to just do my slides and be able to make an offer, and then that's it, and then have everything take care for
Yeah.
me. Like emails go out
Yeah.
and people get the replay, and I don't want to have to sit there and create some sort of automation or something that they're probably never going to use. So um,
Yes.
we pre-sold Webinar Ninja back in 2014. It kind of it sold out like in 48 hours, and this is just purely on. I had a very small email list. I only had like it was like 500 people on my email list, and it was mainly just people I met at conferences. And I didn't ask them to buy it. I just asked them, hey, if you think this is something cool, would you share it with your audience so they could just share
Yeah.
on email or newsletter or on social or whatever. Um, this is 2014, so it wasn't as crowded back then. You put something on Twitter, people saw it. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was a different world. And then from there, we iterated and improved, and we heard from our beta users and try to improve the software. It was very rough in the beginning in 2014, but today, 8 years later, very proud of what we've built, and we've had over 2 million people attend a webinar on Webinar Ninja.
So
Uh,
awesome.
yeah, and we're really proud of the growth that we've had and all the users that have used us. And One of the things that we love about the product itself is just it empowers people to spread their message, it empowers people to connect with their audience, and empowers people to um, retain their audience and stay connected with
Yeah.
them. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was interesting because it kind of
Solid.
happened in parallel with the $100 MBA show, the podcast. But
Yeah.
again, it was just me trying to teach better and be able to offer something that's easy to use.
I love it. That's so great. Thank you for sharing that story. And it's really inspiring to me. I'm kind of at a similar point, and I'll share some more about this with you, later on offline. But just launching a software that's just kind of scratching my own itch,
Yeah.
as far as the podcast is concerned and everything. So it's fun to hear. Fun to hear
Software
your
is a
experience, and
beast.
that has
Software is a
worked well.
different type of
Yeah.
business. It's not easy.
Yeah.
I would
No.
say that it's probably the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life.
Wow.
Yeah, it is super challenging
That's
because
big.
yeah, I mean, a friend of mine, Noah Kagan, who runs Rap Sumo,
Yeah.
he became my friend through an introduction because I was starting Webinar Ninja, and a friend of mine was like, "Hey, you should meet this guy. He's in software. He was number 30 on Facebook. He could
Yeah.
give you some advice because he's a few steps ahead of you, like a lot of steps ahead of me."
Yeah.
But the thing he told me on a Skype call was, the one thing that I tell you, man, is that software, there's no finish line. As soon as you release a new feature, the customers will be like, "Oh, that's great and all, but can I have this? Can I have
Yeah.
this? Can I have this? Can I have
Yeah.
this?" So,
So true.
yeah, watch out for that. And it's very different from products or content or e-commerce, where it's like you ship something and it's out there in the world and you
Yeah.
have this
It's
sense of
done.
satisfaction. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. That's great feedback. Good wisdom. Hard-earned wisdom, right? That's great. Well, for folks that are listening along, I know we're coming up on time here, and you want to connect further with you. And and I guess before I even get to that, I just want to say, thank you. This has just been such a fun conversation, and just hit on so many like those, just ideas that I don't know. I feel like they're contrary. They go contrary to popular belief in some ways, and follow your passions and like these kinds of ideas, and so I just really appreciate you just kind of sharing so much wisdom with us along the way. So thank you for that. And for folks that want to follow along and connect deeper with you, do you have anything you'd like to invite people to?
Yeah, I always tell people, if you are at any point in your journey in business and you're looking to improve or start or get some traction, the best gift I can give the world is my podcast, the $100 MBA show. So whatever app you're on right now, go ahead and subscribe. It's a daily, 5 days a week podcast, about 10 to 15 minutes long, where we talk about topics that most people don't talk about, like how do you fire an employee, or how do you deal with a crisis when you're on holiday, or what about who should you hire first, things like that. So and I purposely like to talk about these topics because I experience these things and can't find anything on it. It's like,
Yes,
it
need
reminded me
resources.
exactly. It reminded me of my teaching days, where I remember my first day teaching. No one teaches you in university anything about classroom management. What do you do when a student talks back at you or throws up? Like what's the protocol, right?
Yeah.
So that's business every day, and no one talks about these things. So I try
It's
to
got to
bring
be
light
like
to that.
75% of being a teacher, I guess, depending on what level. But like, I think of my son's just finished kindergarten, going into first grade, just like that's got to be like a 90% classroom management kind of job, like
Totally.
But yes, to your point, like we don't learn these things. There's no place to go, and so I love it.
Yeah.
That's
So the
really great.
podcast is my baby, and I'd love for people to join. If you want to, the only kind of social media I'm really, really active at is Twitter, and my handle is the Omar Zenhom. This is my weakness. I'm not really good at social, and it's just because it's hard. I'm a kind of person that likes to focus on one thing, and for me, my craft and what I'm trying to get better at is the podcast, and be better on the mic, and be a better teacher and conversationalist, and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And it's hard for me to spread my energy. I always kind of look at it like martial arts. Like if I'm like trying to be a judo master, right? I got to go and hit that mat every day and get better. If I say, okay, Monday I'm going to do judo, Tuesday I'm going to do tennis, Wednesday I'm going to do, crochet, it's going to take me a whole lot longer, or I may never get there. And I can have this could be a flawed, way of thinking, but I feel like social media keeps me from becoming better in some
Yeah.
ways. So I just choose Twitter to be
I love it.
the media I'm on.
Well, I think it's just wise in many regards. One is just, recognizing your limitations, that you can't do everything well. And then by saying no to some things, you're, allowing yourself to go deep, and gain mastery and other things, which is the podcast, which is teaching. And so, yeah, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. So, we'll make sure to link up to the podcast, to Webinar Ninja, to your Twitter in the show notes, so people can just click right on and follow along. Omar, thank you so much. It's just been so fun. Really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Had a lot of fun, Dan. Thanks.
Thank you so much for watching and listening. You can find links to everything that we talked about in our show notes at themeaningmovement.com. If you haven't left a rating or review wherever you're watching or listening, please take a moment to do that. On YouTube, you can hit that thumbs up button. On most of the podcast catchers, you can leave some sort of star rating plus a few words, and that is how people find this show. It's particularly helpful on Apple, but you can also do it on Spotify, Amazon, and a bunch of other podcast catchers. Our music is by Tom Roram. Our artwork is by Eleazar Ruiz. We'll be back with you shortly. Thanks so much. There's a big problem that's changing everything about the world as we know it: carbon and the impact of humans on the earth. We talk about it with words like climate change and global warming. But there's just two really important things that you need to know about it. First, this is an overwhelmingly big problem. So much so that it's likely that you feel as though your choices don't matter in the face of it. Second, that overwhelming feeling that I just mentioned, it's intentional. It was put there by design. The industries that make the biggest environmental impact have a vested interest in you feeling overwhelmed and powerless. They've marketed, lobbied, and schemed to create that feeling in all of us. In short, we've been lied to. But here's the good news. There's a lot you can do to make a difference. And the other good news is that there's still time. The Carbon Almanac is a book and project about these problems and what we can do to solve them. It was created and run by volunteers on the premise that it's not too late, but none of us can fix this problem on our own. We need each other. There are many ways to get involved, but simply learning more is a great start. Here are 3 steps you can take. First, go to thecarbonalmanac.org and sign up for the Daily Difference emails. They give you a short thought and a practical action that you can take alongside thousands of others every day. Second, get the Carbon Almanac book. It's full of facts, articles, graphs, and art. It's beautiful and fun to engage with. It's all footnoted and fact-checked. And importantly, it's made by volunteers whose only agenda is to solve these systemic issues. You can find it wherever books are sold. Finally, since you're listening to a podcast, search for the Carbon Almanac wherever you're listening. You'll find the Carbon Almanac Podcast Network and a few shows featuring expert insight, discussion, inspiration, and ways to take action. There's even a show just for kids. Do what appeals to you. Just do something. There's still time to make a huge difference in the future of the planet, but we can't solve this on our own. Join us.